Have you ever stopped to wonder what would happen if an AI didn't just know a bunch of stuff, but could actually learn how to get smarter all on its own? I'm not just talking about feeding it more data. I mean, what if it could actively teach itself? Well, that's exactly the wild idea we're going to break down today. Okay, so let's just dive right in. The whole question driving this incredible new research is, can an AI learn more like we do? I mean, think about it. When you or I study for a test, we don't just passively scan the pages, right? No way. We take notes, we rephrase concepts in our own words, we try to make connections. We're basically learning how to learn. So, can we teach an AI to do that too? So to get this, you got to understand the fundamental difference here. On one side, you have the large language models we have today, LLMs. They are amazing for sure, but they're basically a static snapshot of knowledge. Think of it like a photograph of the internet taken at one specific moment. It's powerful, yeah, but it's frozen in time. The dream, the goal of this new research is to create something totally different, a dynamic system, an AI that can learn and evolve and keep adding new information long after its first day of school. And this really gets us to the core problem that this new approach is trying to fix. Because it turns out just having a photographic memory of, billions of web pages isn't really the same thing as true understanding. Here it is, in a nutshell. The second an LLM finishes its massive training phase, its learning just slams to a halt. It's done. It can't update its own knowledge with new facts or learn new skills without a complete and frankly incredibly expensive do-over. Let's use an analogy because it really helps. Imagine a student with a perfect photographic memory. They can recite an entire textbook word for word. Sounds brilliant, right? But if they never actually take their own notes or rephrase the ideas or really wrestle with the information to make it their own, how well did they truly get it? That right there, that's the big blind spot for today's AI. Okay, so how in the world do you solve a problem like that? Well, researchers have come up with a really clever new framework. It's called SEAL, which stands for Self-Adapting Language Models. And the name, it really says it all. It is all about giving the model the power to adapt all by itself. So the secret sauce, the core mechanic behind SEAL, is this idea called a self-edit. And this is literally the AI's version of taking study notes. So when it gets a new piece of information, it doesn't just read it. It actively rewrites it. It restructures it into a format that's way more useful for its own brain to learn from. And then it uses those personalized notes to actually update its own programming. So how does this actually work? It's not magic, I promise. It's actually a really elegant process called a self-improvement loop. This is where the AI basically practices, it gets feedback on its practice, and then it refines its own learning strategy over and over and over again. Let's walk through this loop. First, the AI gets new data. Let's say it's that textbook passage. Then, step 2, it generates its own self-edit notes. Step 3 is the inner loop. It uses those notes to make a tiny little update to its own internal wiring. This is the actual studying part. Then, step 4, pop quiz. It gets tested on what it just studied to see how well it learned. And finally, step 5, this is the outer loop. If the AI aces the quiz, it gets a reward. Now, this is a core idea from reinforcement learning. You reward the behavior you want to encourage. So this reward reinforces the specific note-taking strategies that worked, basically teaching the AI how to become a better and better learner over time. Okay, I know. This all sounds amazing in theory. It's a great idea. But the real question, the one you're probably asking, is, does this thing actually work in practice? Well, the researchers ran a bunch of experiments to find out. So for the first test, they kept it simple but super important, knowledge incorporation. Could the AI actually learn new facts? They gave the models a passage with some new information, and then they asked questions about it. But here's the trick. They didn't let the AI see the passage again. It had to have truly learned the information, not just be good at looking it up. And the results, they are pretty wild. The base model, with no special training, it only got about a third of the questions right. Now, when they used study notes that were generated by the gigantic GPT 4.1 model, the accuracy jumped way up to about 46%. But here's the kicker. The SEAL model, after it learned how to take its own notes, scored even higher at 47%. Think about that. A smaller model learned to be a better learner, and it actually beat the synthetic data from a much, much bigger model. That's a huge deal. All right, the next experiment really pushed the envelope. Instead of just learning facts, they tested if SEAL could learn an entirely new skill, an abstract reasoning skill, from just a tiny handful of examples.
Now, this is a way harder task. This is testing its ability to generalize, to really think.
And the results here, wow, they just perfectly show the power of that self-improvement loop. Before it was trained how to learn, the model's self-edits only worked about 20% of the time. But after training, after it figured out which learning strategies were the best, its success rate just skyrocketed to over 72%. It didn't just get better at the task, it literally learned how to teach itself that task more effectively. So, what does all this mean for the future? Well, this kind of research, it points toward a pretty fundamental shift in how we think about AI. We might be moving away from seeing them as static tools and more towards, well, evolving partners that can learn and grow right alongside us. And there are a few massive possibilities this opens up. One is getting over the so-called data wall. See, we're kind of running out of human-generated text on the internet to train these AIs, but a model that can create its own high-quality study material, it could keep improving forever. This also leads to way more capable agentic systems, basically AIs that can interact with the world and actually learn from what happens. And ultimately, this is a huge step toward what people call true continual learning, where an AI's education is just never finished. Now, let's be real, it's not all perfect just yet. There is a major hurdle, and it's something called catastrophic forgetting. It's kind of what it sounds like. Just like us, sometimes when the AI learns a ton of new stuff, it can start to forget the old stuff. So figuring out how to balance new knowledge with old knowledge, that's the next big mountain to climb. And this quote from the researchers themselves, it really just sums the whole thing up perfectly. They're saying that we're getting close to a limit on how much data we can just shovel into these models. The future of AI progress, they argue, is going to depend on a model's ability to create its own useful training data, to basically become its own teacher. So that brings us to our final thought for the day. We've seen that it's actually possible for an AI to not just learn facts, but to learn the very process of learning itself, which, you have to admit, leads to a pretty fascinating and maybe, just maybe, a slightly unnerving question. If an AI can truly learn how to learn, what will it decide to teach itself next?